Good morning. Thank you for joining us. As you all know, education funding has been a major topic among members of the General Assembly and members of our administration and community leaders around the state. We have an important announcement today. We have been in discussions with the leaders of the four caucuses in the General Assembly, and we've agreed to form a bipartisan commission to take up education funding reform with a goal of developing recommendations on how to improve our state funding for schools by February 1st of this coming year, 2017. That's a tight time frame, but it would allow us to use the recommendations to hopefully draft legislation in the spring session. And I believe that that time frame can be met because the discussions have been going on for a while. Frankly, they've been going on with our administration and the General Assembly for months. And as many of you who are observers of politics in Illinois know, these discussions have been going on for many, many years. I am optimistic that we can come to some good conclusions from these discussions. We've had a negotiation about how large to make the commission, as you can imagine. We didn't discuss what the table shape should be or what times we're going to meet, but we agreed on a 30-person commission. Each legislative leader will be able to appoint 5 members of their choosing. We've heard preliminary feedback from the leaders on who they want to pick, but I'm not going to speak for them. I'll let them speak to you at the appropriate time on who they'd like to bring in. My sense is it's going to be a combination of legislators as well as education experts. I've asked Secretary Purvis, Education Secretary for our administration, to chair the commission. I've also asked Reverend James Meeks, who's the chairman of the State Board of Education, to be a facilitator, a convener, and a liaison between this commission and the Illinois State Board of Education. The goal is to fundamentally improve the way Illinois funds its schools. I'm going to quote 3 important facts for you to note for for the people of Illinois. First, I ran for governor to try to make the schools in Illinois the best in America. One of the motivators for me, when I looked at the 10 years prior to my becoming governor, education funding was cut 4 times in those 10 years. And that's just wrong. I mean, when I realize we've had budget troubles and unbalanced budgets for decades, but education should come first. Our teachers, our students, our parents should come first with taxpayer dollars. And the fact that our school funding was treated as a political football made me outraged, and it outraged many of my fellow believers that education is the most important thing we do together as a community. So that's point 1. Point 2, Illinois is dead last. We are number 50 out of 50 among all the states for the percentage of education funding that comes from the state. We are the worst state in America for funding our schools. We overly rely on local property taxes. We're the state that relies the most on local property taxes among the 50 states. Our state support is the lowest. That's wrong. It denies, in my opinion, it denies the American dream to low-income families because they don't get the same level of resources as higher-income families do, given their circumstances and their homes and their property taxes that they pay. And that gets to the third point, the third fact that I'd like to emphasize. Illinois has the largest gap between spending in high-income schools versus our low-income schools. We have the largest gap of any of the 50 states. Again, that is wrong. It is unfair. Education is a fundamental right in America. It's the way that people raise their quality of life, their standard of living, their incomes. Education has got to be the priority. And low-income kids deserve the opportunity for a good education just as much as any other young person. We need more equity, and we need to increase the overall state support. We need both equity and an increase in the funding level. And that's going to be the goal of this commission, to recommend how to do that. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Purvis to talk a little bit more about the detail of the commission.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. And it's a privilege to be here today to talk about one of the most important topics in the state today: how we ensure that our public schools are both adequately and equitably funded. The governor talked about this even before he took office, the importance of having pre-K through 12th grade schools that have the resources that they need so that teachers can do the most important work in this state, which is educate our youth. Some facts about the commission. As the governor stated, this will be a bipartisan, bicameral commission. There will be 25 members on the commission, 5 from each of the caucuses and 5 appointed by the governor. We are waiting for all of the names from the caucuses, but we have had commitment from all 4 caucuses to put legislators on this. We are looking to meet at least monthly beginning in August, but understanding that there will be work going on weekly between now and February 1st. The goal is that by February 1st, that this group will put forward bipartisan legislation that can be used as the foundation for a new funding formula going forward in FY18. As we all know, over the last number of years, our schools have had to suffer through proration. Another way of saying that our schools were cut and their spending was cut. Over the last 2 years, the General Assembly has come together with support from the governor and increased funding in our schools to record levels. But again, so we believe right now is the time to work on that bipartisan spirit, to move forward to something that is wanted and that is important to both parties, and to every parent, teacher, and administrator in the state. We also look forward to working with and getting specific support and input from external partners who have already done work in this group. So we expect external partners to come in on a regular basis, both to the larger groups to inform the 25 members of the panel, but also to help us work in smaller groups to help to understand how to implement this new funding formula. We also will have, as the governor stated, Chairman Meeks will be working as a facilitator and a convener of this group and helping this to move forward. And we look forward to working closely with Superintendent Smith and his team in the implementation and the running of models as we go forward. We see the Illinois State Board of Education is working closely with this group going forward. Finally, I'd just like to thank those people who have done work over the last 12 months specifically to move this forward. We know that over the last 5 or 6 years, there have been a number of attempts to try to change the funding formula. I think everyone will agree that over the last 12 months, we've actually made great progress, and you can see it in the similarities of many of the bills that were filed in both the House and the Senate in the last few months. Our goal is to build upon that work that was already done, to look at pieces of the evidence-based model, to look at pieces of legislation like Senate Bill 231, and to understand what will be the best way to go forward for our children and youth. So thank you very much for being here today. I feel honored to be able to work with this group, and I look forward to updating you along the way and to coming together in February with a new funding formula for our children from preschool through 12th grade.
Thanks, Madam Secretary. Again, I don't want to paint this as an easy process. There is not agreement within the Democratic caucus on how best to do this. Democrats don't agree among themselves in the General Assembly. Republicans don't agree among themselves within the General Assembly. And then we've got to bring Republicans and Democrats together to try to get an agreement. This will not be easy, but it's been going on. The discussions have been going on for a while. And I believe with some encouragement from our administration, as well as from the Speaker's office and from President Cullerton, I believe that we can come to a good conclusion for the children of Illinois. Again, the time frame is tight, but the if we stay on this rigorous schedule and really focus on this in the coming weeks and several months, I believe we can get to a good conclusion. I want to emphasize our administration, I believe very strongly in benchmarking and learning from others, so we'll be studying what has gone on in other states, what's worked for other states and what has not worked well. I also have asked that we look at what's going on in some other countries. I am concerned that the United States of America is losing the education race compared to other nations, and Illinois is losing the education race within America. And we have to win this race. It is essential for the quality of life for the people of the future of the people of Illinois, the people of America. Education is the key to a higher standard of living, a higher quality of life. It's the key to economic growth. If we have strong economic growth policies and excellent schools, our other challenges will be dealt with. Now, with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'll say this. I realize there are a lot of topics people are going to want to talk about. I will ask today, I'll be with you tomorrow, and I'll be with you the next day here in Chicago with the press, so we can talk about other things on other days. I'd ask that your questions be about education today.
So, Governor, there have been 20, 30, 40 other task forces dating back to Edgar Eichenberg looking at changing school funding. Why should we be in any way excited about another one?
I think partly because there have been efforts. I think there's a frustration level of wanting to get something done. I also think the financial pressures that school districts are facing, the state is facing, the city of Chicago is facing, there's a lot of motivation to try to improve the system. Now, you're pointing out why this is, we can't say that this is, granted. This is going to be hard, but I'm optimistic that we can get something done.
Do you expect that a tax increase will be part of this? When people have talked about millionaire's tax going to education funding, or that the swap idea, is that all in the mix? How open are you to a tax increase?
Well, I'll say two things about taxes. I am an anti-tax person, and I ran to try to bring down the tax burden. But I've also said that in the context of significant reforms to grow the economy, make us more competitive, and protect taxpayers, give more value for taxpayers, that I'm open to some new revenue. One of the reasons I was very supportive of spending, I actually insisted last year that we spend more for schools than even what the General Assembly passed in the last year's budget. Last year's budget, as you all know, I vetoed the bulk of it because it was out of balance, but I signed the school funding portion because schools should come first, and the General Assembly didn't even pass as much as I wanted to spend on schools last year. This year, we came to a compromise in the stopgap spending plan with more money for schools. One of the reasons I supported meaningfully more money for schools is to help deal with the issue you're talking about. It's going to take some more resources to help facilitate coming up with a new way of allocating those resources.
Governor, I know you want to stay on topic, but
all right, Charles, way to go off.
Your political party's presumptive presidential nominee is a few blocks from here. Hundreds of people are in the street protesting. You can't really not address that. And while you're here, he's there, you're not there.
I love you, Charles. I'm not going to comment.
Not going to comment.
Well,
Not going to
we
comment.
need to hear you say something. I mean, come on. If you can't wait till tomorrow, today's the day. He is here. He's right.
I've said everything I'm going to say about the presidential race.
Would you talk about Mike Pence?
Yes, sir.
please?
So on the topic, can you say anything more specific than we ought to more equitably and adequately fund education than we do? Can you give any guidance at all to this commission other than what you said? Something more specifically to give a sense about how you as governor would act here to lead.
Well, again, I want to let the commission do its work. And they may well come up with some recommendations that I don't personally love, but I think if there's bipartisan agreement, I'm going to try to be supportive. I will say that there's been good work done. I applaud Senator Barrickman for his hard work on education funding research and effort. Senator Andy Manar spent a lot of time and effort and good faith trying to come up with a new system. There are other members in the General Assembly who are passionate about this, and I applaud them for their emphasis on this priority. I'll say a couple of things. My personal bias is towards what I've learned from other states, what's called evidence-based funding. That's my bias. I'm a data-oriented person. What's working? What's not working? What information do we have about how the schools are performing? What's their class sizes? What are the accomplishments of their teachers? What are the credentials and achievements of their teaching? There are various things that can be factored into what do we want to accomplish for our young people. And I want to try to use evidence, and I want to try to use data from other states. I emphasized the three facts that I think are so critically important. We have been cutting school funding in Illinois for years. We have to stop that. Schools should come first. Secondly, it's not fair to local property owners. It's one of the reasons. It's maybe not the biggest reason, but one of the reasons we have the highest property taxes in America is we overly rely on local property taxes to fund our schools. That's one of the reasons. I don't think it's the biggest, but it's one of them. We need more state support for schools. That's why I asked for more last year, asked for more this year. I'm going to ask for more next year and the year after that. When a family that has a lower income has a home that's not capable of supporting the taxes necessary to have a good school in the neighborhood, we have a duty as a community, as a state, to help that school get the resources so that young person coming from that family can get a great education. We have that moral obligation, in my opinion. So we need to increase state support overall. The percentage coming from the state needs to go up relative to the amount coming from local property taxes. And we've got to measure ourselves on the size of our gap. To me, it's unconscionable that Illinois is the state that has the biggest gap between rich schools and poor schools on funding. That's just wrong. How do we end up here? It's just wrong. Pension funding should be part of what's considered as part of the reforms advocated within this, because that's part of the overall spending. Frankly, it's part of teacher compensation, and it should be considered as we're looking at how we fund our schools and how we spend. For me, I'm going to recommend that the task force, the commission, have everything on the table. I think we should have everything on the table.
Is the idea off the table, though, that was the foundation of Rauner's bill, that wealthier districts might lose money, might have to shift more money to poor districts? Is that off the table for you?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to be on the commission. I'm not going to be guiding its deliberations. I don't want to personally take anything off the table. I think they should look at what's the right answer for our schools long term for the state of Illinois and have everything be on the table.
But if the result is that money is shifted from wealthier districts to poor districts, do you support that?
Well, again, as I've said, my preference is not to do that. I've said that publicly. One of the reasons that I think we should have more overall state support is to try to minimize that outcome. But I don't want to take anything off the table. I want to let the commission do its work.
Now, to what extent, if any, would you hold out for turnaround agenda items before you approve new money for schools?
Well, I've said two things about reforms. One, I won't sign a unbalanced budget. We've had unbalanced budgets for 25 years. We've got to stop making commitments that we can't keep, that we're not honoring, and stop actually signing checks that, in effect, are going to bounce. We've got to stop that. I'm not going to sign an unbalanced budget. Secondly, I will not support any new taxes without reforms. I've been clear on that from day one. That's not going to change. And which reforms? I've communicated very closely with legislative leaders. They know which reforms I think are most important. But I'm open-minded to which basket collection of reforms can pass and that can make a difference. What we need are two outcomes with the reforms: to grow our economy, make ourselves more competitive. Because if we can't grow our way out of this, our only chance to pay down our unfunded pension and our debt is to grow more. It's not possible to tax our way out of this problem. So we need more economic growth, reform one, and we need to protect our taxpayers. There's not a balance in Illinois between taxpayers and the special interest groups that make their money from government. We're one of the states where taxpayers are here and special interests are here. Texas is the other way. I'm not saying let's be Texas, but I think we can be. Massachusetts has found balance. Other Democratic-controlled states have found balance. We need a balance. That's what our reforms are trying to do.
You mentioned Senators Rauner and Berkman, and they're on this
Again, I think it's premature for me to comment. I would think it's pretty likely that they would be on. I think it's very likely, but again, I don't want to speak ahead because that's really up to the legislative leaders to pick who's going to be on in their groups.
So they haven't confirmed anyone yet?
They've given us verbal statements about who they're likely to put on because we had a negotiation about should it be 3, 4, or 5 per group. I believe in smaller is better because when the bigger, pretty soon you got the General Assembly, and we've already know that that doesn't work that well. So, but we ended up at 25, at 5 per caucus. Yes.
Could you talk about Mike Pence as a possible vice presidential candidate?
I've said.
Often talked about how Indiana is doing so well. Sounds like it would be a good choice.
I've said what I'm going to say about the presidential race.
Governor.
Given how contentious some of this stuff is, particularly Chicago public schools, and given the fact that the Democrats have a majority of the General Assembly for good or bad, why are Republicans picking a majority panel rather than say splitting it 50-50?
It's just how we've agreed to do it, and I'll just leave it at that.
Who are your 5? Who are your 5? Who would be president?
I don't think that we've announced that yet. We'll announce that soon. We're not going to announce that yet.
You haven't announced it, but who do you chose then?
Don't you love this?
4 more or 5 more in addition to that?
4 more.
4 more.
I mean, if you're really serious about this, wouldn't you have some Democrats here to announce this, since this is a bipartisan commission?
Believe me, we have had, the Democrats are committed to doing this. We don't have any, Beth and I are here now since she's chairman, and I was the instigator of this. That's why the 2 of us are here.
So it'll be
Governor-
3 in addition to Reverend Meeks and Sport.
Yeah, so, well, one of the topics I'll say is, will Reverend Miggs be the best as being on the commission or being the facilitator and the coordinator, convener with ISB? That's one of the topics. Should he be one of the members? Because there's some folks who say it would be better for him, given his leadership of ISB, that he's the liaison, not necessarily. We haven't decided that yet.
And when you talk about external partners, what kind of groups are you talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I'm always afraid of naming any groups because then you might leave out some groups. But I think when you think across the landscape, even of the last few months, there have been a number of groups who have been very involved in this. From groups who were in part of the Eikenberry work back in the day, like the Civic Committee. You have groups who have been very involved in EFAB. You have groups like Advance Illinois. You have groups like the Management Alliance, LUDA, Stand for Children. There are many groups out there who are experts in this. And actually, as the governor said, there are national experts that we would like to come in to give us feedback on what we've already put together. So again, this is not to restudy this. This is to take the work that's already been done by all of these groups and by legislators and build upon that moving forward. But we think we will be looking far and wide across the state and also across the country for people to give us advice on what is working best in other parts of our country as well.
Where is Meeks today?
Last question.
We were told he was going to be here.
Yeah, so we've had, frankly, a number of legislators who are very interested in this. Getting things scheduled is hard, and we want to, rather than having them, you can call them and talk about it. They're all pretty enthusiastic about it. Trying to get them all here with Beth and me was more logistically hard than it was worth. You guys should just call them and talk about it. They're around and pretty enthusiastic about it.
Senator Curtis, just talk about the PARC test, real quick, and the SAT, and how the money's in it, or the state's going to come up
We
with
should
the
talk
money
about
to pay for SAT test.
So I think very specifics about this should obviously go to Superintendent Smith and the staff at ISB. But the decision was made. I think Superintendent Smith has been spending time really through the ESSA, through the listening tours that are going on, listening to what he's hearing from the field about assessment across the state. Again, this was our 2nd year of implementing PARC, and part of the idea is understanding, are the data that are being received helping our schools, helping our parents, and helping our state make the decisions that they need to make. The superintendent announced yesterday the decision that the SAT would be used as the assessment for high school, and I think it is bringing back, we had 1 year without this, but a year that every student in the state, every junior in the state, will take a college entrance exam, which has been a long and rich history of this state. So I think by making this the state level exam. We have gone back to that idea of being very focused on college entrance. I think many places may continue to use Park for high school, but I think the State Superintendent Isby made a recommendation that fits with much of the feedback that they've received from the field. The requirements of ESSA coming forward, that we need to have one test, and again, Park at high school is a course-based exam, not a grade-based exam, so that allows us to meet that criteria. And again, it will bring us back to the fact that every student in the state will take a college entrance exam.
Do you expect any trouble with the federal government at the lower level when there was some concern about potential loss of funding last year?
I think that is a question better for ISB than for me. So I would ask you to ask them that question because they are in closer contact with the federal government than is my office.
That you don't physically concerned?
At this point, I think we are looking very, we are always looking closely to make sure we are meeting the requirements of No Child Left Behind and still ESSA, and I know that is at the top of what the superintendent looks at daily as well.
Thank you.
Where will you be during the convention next week?
Thanks, everybody.
Senator Barrackman and McConaughey are available for questions.
About the convention, about Trump, about, yeah. Right now.